What is the role and cost of ethics in culture?
This podcast is brought to you by Arcamed, fast and focused design and manufacturing.
I'm Greg Maurer, founder and owner of Arcamed.
And I'm Caroline Squatrigo, talent engagement specialist. We are on a journey to grow, learn, and gain expertise in small to mid-size company culture. Join us.
All right, Caroline, what's the question of the day?
So today we're going to talk about ethics and the role that it plays in culture. So, there's a lot of costs involved here, and we'll explore what's the cost of having an ethical culture. Is there a cost of not having an ethical culture? I guess that's the goal. We're going to find out all those answers. So first we'll be joined by our own Kevin Etzkorn. Now, Kevin is an owner of Arcamed, and he has a great story to share about a contractor that went above and beyond to act ethically. And unfortunately, there was also another one involved who did not quite meet that standard. So he'll share all about that in a moment. But later we'll be joined by two guests. So first, Phil Kenney, and he is the president of F.A. Wilhelm Construction Company and one of the characters in Kevin's story. And we will also be talking to Joanne Gavin. Joanne is the Associate Dean for Undergraduate Programs and Professor of Management at Marist University.
Okay, so Kevin, my longtime business partner, as I like to say, we've been married longer than my wife and I have been married. And Kevin's here to share two different experiences that he had with contractors on an ethical with an ethical difference. So Kevin, thanks first of all for coming and joining us today. And who do you want to start with? You want to start with the floors or the sewer?
Well, let's go ahead and start with the floors. I think, as you know, Greg, I've been involved in managing a lot of the projects that involve general contractors. And one of the things that we've discussed is that whenever you're undertaking a large project, it's not a matter of if something's going to go wrong. It's a matter of what is it, when is it, and what is it going to be. Hopefully, it's not going to be too catastrophic. Well, as I sit there and I think back to when we were moving into this building, Arcamed, we engaged Phil Kenney and Wilhelm to help us do the tenant improvements to get this space ready for us to move in and ready for equipment. And, as we sat there and went through, Wilhelm did a great job in terms of quoting and putting together a proposal that met all of our requirements. But as we sat around and we said, well, what is the one thing in this project that has to go right? And it's the flooring. And the reason that the flooring had to go right was because once that was done, all the equipment would be put in place, powered up, and ready to start making product.
If I were superstitious, I might say we should never have had that conversation about what's the most important thing that can't go wrong.
I would tend to agree in retrospect, but sure enough, as we sat there and went through the project, we had a major issue with the flooring. We had needed to have it epoxied, and because of the timing of the project itself, the epoxy needed to be put down, and immediately after it was dried, the equipment was moved in, put into place. And almost immediately after the equipment was put into place, the floor started peeling across the entire manufacturing floor, which was number one, very surprising to us, and number two, very troubling to us, because now we were put in a position where we said we need to be able to address the flooring, and then we need to figure out how we're going to move forward.
And for the benefit of our listeners, moving the equipment in and out is no small task. It involves its own set of contractors and a sizable expense as well.
Absolutely. And so, this was one of those scenarios where in the end, the outcome was preventable. It was something where had the floor been tested appropriately, we could have identified before putting the epoxy down that there was an alternative that would have been a permanent fix for it. And because that wasn't identified on the front end, we had to go through all of this hassle, and it was very difficult.
And I'll say that in all of the documents that memorialized our relationship with the contractors, nowhere in those documents did it say, and the flooring contractor must test the floor. It wasn't explicitly a requirement. So depending on how you read this, you could interpret it as saying, well, we put a floor down, and maybe we should have tested the floor, but you didn't contract for us to do the testing. And but thankfully, that's not how Phil and Wilhelm read the documents.
Absolutely. I mean, when we engage with a general contractor or a subcontractor, we're looking at them to be the subject matter experts. We rely on them to tell us what is an appropriate treatment to meet our end goals. And when this was raised as an issue to Wilhelm, it was clear that, number one, Wilhelm cared very much that the outcome would be to our satisfaction, and they took responsibility for the oversight of not having the floor tested.
Yeah, and one thing I remember about Phil was that they never inquired as to the cost of the fix prior to undertaking the responsibility. They looked at this and they said, absolutely, the floor should have been tested, and we didn't do it, and we're going to make it right. And nowhere in that conversation about undertaking the responsibility did they ever ask, well, and how much is this going to cost?
Yeah, and again, they went above and beyond in the sense that the treatment that needed to be done to the floor was actually a more expensive treatment than the epoxy. And they could have asked us to pay for that difference. But in acknowledgement of everything that had occurred, they took care of it entirely.
Yeah, I remember having a conversation with Phil about asking him to provide us what he thought was fair as far as how to account for that difference, and we were willing to provide the payment for that difference, but he wouldn't accept it. So now a contrast, and Caroline, you can remember fondly the consequences of the sewer issue, right?
Fondly is a strange word to use, Greg, but I do recall, I'll say some flooding problems that we had, and it wasn't, it wasn't like water flooding, it was sewage. So we had some pretty gross days in the office. I'm not gonna lie, I still have nightmares about it, but thankfully we were able to solve it. So we haven't had that problem in quite a few years.
All right, so we had a contractor come out that our property manager engaged on our behalf. Kevin, how'd that go?
So again, this was a scenario where it was an urgent issue that needed to be addressed. We not only had issues within our suite, but across the building for multiple tenants. So we had to have somebody that we trusted to come in and assess the situation, and then also make recommendations of what needed to be done. And in this scenario, they came out and they did a whole host of testing, which included both video surveillance as well as some other testing to give them indications of where the problem was. And as we sat, Greg, I recall us both sitting in the office talking with this particular contractor and making it very clear, whatever solution we come up with here has to be a permanent solution. It has to address the issue entirely, even if it's going to cost us more to do so.
Yeah, and they put a solution in place. The property manager at the time, rather than contracting for a solution, they contracted for the specific solution that they provided us. So it really it made no mention of efficacy, and there was no guarantee there. And that's probably a mistake on our part that we didn't negotiate that contract well enough. But at the end, it failed. The solution failed. And we went to the contractor and said, are you going to make good on this? And they talked all the right talk about how they do business the Indiana way, and they make good, and they have a 100-year reputation, and then they got the bill.
Yeah, it was really unfortunate because, again, this was an example of where they actually had the information they needed on the front end to know that what they were proposing as a solution wouldn't work as a permanent solution, and that's not what they represented to us, and it was it was a six-figure project to address this. So, one of the things that struck me in particular about this case was as we sat in a meeting with the owner of the company as well as the engineer that was responsible for this particular project. The engineer was misrepresenting what he had communicated to us as well as the situation. And what struck me about that was this was somebody who had fear. He had fear of repercussions, of recognizing that the mistake that he had made would have real consequences from a dollar perspective, and rather than do the right thing, perhaps he was afraid for his job. And, again, from a cultural perspective, I think about wanting to make sure that, culturally speaking, employees feel comfortable enough to come up and say, hey, something's wrong here, we dropped the ball, we need to do the right thing.
Yeah, if there's going to be any fear in our culture, it'd be fear of not doing the right thing. And if any of our listeners have the need to learn from our experience in the sewer incident, just give me a call. I'll be happy to talk you through what we learned so you don't make the same mistakes we made.
Yeah, Kevin, I appreciate you coming on and sharing that with us. This is a newer story to me. I kind of heard whispers of it throughout the building, but it's fun to get the full take from you. And we're also about to go in and talk to Phil Kenney so that we can hear his take on it. So I'm excited to hear from him. Thank you, Kevin, and let's bring on Phil.
Okay, today we have Phil Kenney with us. Phil is the president of F.H. Wilhelm Construction Company, which was started by his grandfather, Francis A. Wilhelm, in 1923. Under Phil's leadership, Wilhelm has grown to become number 100 on ENR's top 400 contractors listing and one of the largest employers of construction labor in the Midwest. Phil is also heavily engaged civically, including at the American Heart Association, the Indianapolis Chamber of Commerce, and the Wabash College Board of Trustees. Phil, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Well, we're very excited to talk to you. I know Arcamed has some personal experience with you and how well you do business, so I can't wait to hear your philosophy on all of this. Can you tell me how you got involved with your company?
Sure. As you mentioned, the company was started by my grandfather in 1923 here in Indianapolis, so we're approaching our 100th year. And when I was finishing up 8th grade, before I started my freshman year at high school, I went to work here back in our yard during the summer, and then worked each summer here, and then on through college, same thing, worked here. And then at the end of it, my uncle, who was then running the business, had an opening, and I started working here. So I've never worked anywhere else in my whole career. And in fact, I was going through my desk the other day and found a pay stub from 1976, which would have been the first summer I started here. So that's why I got here. It's a family business. I still have a couple cousins that work here, so it's that's how a roundabout way how I got here.
Caroline, what were you doing back in 1976?
I wasn't born. I was not a thought in my parents' head. I don't even know how old they were.
So Phil, having not worked anywhere else, how did you come around to valuing the concept of culture and company culture at Wilhelm?
It was a combination of at well, my mom was a Wilhelm. That was so it was on my mom's side of the family was construction. My dad was an ophthalmologist, so he was busy helping people also. So both started at home with customer service and serving others in the community, and then as I started here working full time, my uncle really drilled into all the employees, and I still try to do it today. That we are a service organization, and customer service is key to what we do here. So that's the culture started, like I said, way back many years ago, and we try to carry that on today because that's again because we're a service organization.
So, in thinking about the culture as it relates to your employees, has that changed over the years since you took over from your uncle? The concept of servant leadership, grew during that time, and other things have changed as far as our approach to that. How has that shown up at Wilhelm?
We have grown as a business, and I like to say, as Indianapolis and Central Indiana and our work area have grown through the years, our company's grown right along with it, and we try to stay true to that our roots in that customer service, servant leadership to the community, hard work, and another one that's part of our culture here is family. And so what I mean by that, we just had at the end of last year 7 longtime employees retire. 3 of them had been here for 35 years, and one of them had been here at 50 years. So that kind of family atmosphere is also part of our culture that we're really trying to teach young people now that culture. So it's a continuous educational process for everybody here, and that's again that whole process just continues to improve on our culture here.
So, Phil, it sounds like you've spent your whole career at Wilhelm, which sounds like such an amazing thing to grow with the company and watch it grow. Throughout all of that, have you had any cultural issues that you've had to overcome, or what role have you played in kind of counteracting any type of issues that you've encountered?
It's a great question, and our industry since time began has always been very male dominated. Far as I recall, it's always been very few females here. And then about 10 years ago, I noticed that we're getting more and more females, young females, applying for different positions here. And so we went through the whole interview process, and actually they were very well qualified. And so we've hired a bunch of them, and I like to tell everybody it's made our entire company better. It definitely it's changed the way we do business for the better, and it really improved our culture. And what I mean by that is it used to be the old school way of in construction you work from 6 in the morning till dark, and when we had more young females starting here that were had young families, there several of them couldn't start work here and didn't get here till like 8:30 in the morning, and but they stayed till 6 o'clock in the evening, and then you could tell that they were working from home at night. So it was just a different way to get the same thing done, and that really changed my attitude. And a lot of people here that were of older, let's say that hey, this will work with young females, and I mean in positions of pre-construction, in marketing and accounting, and now our CFO, she's a 32-year-old young mom and doing great things, and our vice president of marketing, female, doing great things. We've got several in our pre-con. So that's the one big cultural change I've seen over the past. It started about 10 years ago, and we're continuing to see it. There's a lot of very, very smart, young, hardworking females here, and we're looking for more.
So it sounds like adaptability is one mechanism you use to unlock that cultural potential by achieving gender diversity, and giving the flexibility for hours is huge. And it seems so straightforward to today's listener, but 10 years ago, 20 years ago, did you have to solve a cultural issue when you decided to go after that kind of diversification? Were there some folks who didn't like it?
Yeah, there were some of the older crowd that they had to watch what they said or did, whether it's out on a construction site or in our office here. So yeah, they had to adapt a little bit, and I've had to correct quite a few of them because I've got four sisters and three daughters, and so I know I use that as a teaching moment. And 99% of the individuals that had to change, they did change, and the few that didn't want to change, they just weed themselves out pretty easily. So yes, we had to adapt, and we're continuing to learn and adapt for that. So like I said, it's made our company that much better.
Did you ever have to part ways with a operational high performer who couldn't adhere to your company culture?
Yes, there's been a couple of those that you hated to see them go, but we made a decision. This is the route we're going as a company and how we're going to act. And they parted ways. And if you follow their careers since they left here, they probably had each 7 or 8 other employers since that time. So there's something inherent there that the reason why they're not here anymore, and they're jumping around our industry. So definitely that's part of it.
So, we talked about our experience with your company, and I feel like, not everyone in your field would have taken the steps that you took to remedy the problems that we were having. And, our documents were not completely clear cut, but you honored the spirit of our business agreement and you did it at cost. What's your philosophy behind that?
It goes back to the culture I mentioned at the beginning, where it's a customer service. People hire us for our expertise in construction, and like you said, it wasn't 100% clear, but shame on us for not making it clear or giving you all kinds of options there. And so to me, that's part of our customer service, because that's why you hire us. And when we ran into issues on the project with the flooring systems, it's something that it was evident to me. It's something we should have checked out ahead of time, and told you all the issues and all your options before we started, and we didn't do that. And shame on us for that. So no, that one was clearly on us as a company. And again, it goes back to great customer service. I actually use the situation at your company with as a training minute here with some of the younger employees, and I try to teach them that customer service is key, and as part of our culture, because we've had several clients that we've had for over 50 years, and the only way to keep those clients is to provide great customer service. So though it's happens periodically, where you have to bite the bullet for various reasons, but that just, to me, it's part of our culture and part of a customer service that we preach here.
So there's definitely a hard cost to that type of ethical behavior, and I'm curious as to whether you think about that as an expense item, just the cost of doing business to the standard that you've set for yourselves, or is it something that actually pays for itself in the form of long-term customer relationships, or is it perhaps a hybrid?
It's no, it's the short term is it did cost us. We went out of pocket on the job, but so that's the short term. The long term is that's the way you retain clients for the long term. So there is that is a hard cost, is just the dollars out of pocket for that reason. There's another hard cost too, that's part of the process, is when we're in situations like that, and the people on the job site are see this, and some of them say, well, that's not our fault, that's the owner's fault, et cetera, because this and this and this wasn't clear. And I tried to explain to them, well, that's just not the way we do business. Here's how we're going to do this. Well, a lot of people, especially young people, that don't understand that, and they think that you're not backing them up, that should be all on the client. And so there are times where you actually lose employees because they don't think you back them up in that situation. But I try to explain to them that that's just part of business. There are going to be times where you could be technically or contractually right. The language could be right in your agreement, but you still have to bite the bullet and do this because it's the right thing to do from a business point of view and a cultural point of view.
Wow.
So again, it's something we run into. It's not very to happen very often because we really try to get into the details and provide our clients with a lot of information at the start of a job, but it happens once in a while.
Yeah, that's incredible. I never really thought about the risk of losing an employee who feels like you backed a customer over them, and even though they maybe didn't do anything wrong, they feel like perhaps that's what's being said. I never thought about it like that. But what I'm really hearing from you, Phil, is that you approach relationships relationally and not as a transaction or a series of transactions, but as part of an ongoing relationship. And I think that's indicative of your conduct as it related to our project. And so, do you have a story you could tell? Another story about how you took a short-term hard cost and then over the years realized the long-term benefit through the continuing customer relationship?
Sure, we have a long-term relationship with Eli Lilly. We've worked for them for the last 50 or 60 years, and there's been similar situations where they've got an existing building where here's the job we'd like you to do. Please give us a price to do this. Here are some documents to look at, and same kind of situation there, that it wasn't very clear, but we looked at price the work, told them the schedule, and it just took us longer because of a variety of things, and we just bit the bullet and went ahead and completed the work because we knew we were in it for the long term, and that's a goal because I've seen businesses. So that's an example there, and each of the clients we've worked for that many years, these type of situations pop up periodically, and we handle them the same way. But to me, it's something that your reputation in business means everything, and the contractors that don't um, step up in these kind of situations, and again they have a short-term gain but they lose their client long term, and that begins to get around the community of this type of contractor, and our industry, it's too bad, but our industry is full of companies like that.
Yeah, we've experienced that with another vendor that we talked about at the beginning of this episode, right, Caroline?
Yeah, I mean the flip side to this story is our sewer pipe vendor, and they did not have the same outlook on customer relationships as you did. And they saw it as a much more transactional relationship rather than something long term. What are the costs of behaving like that? I mean, I don't know if there are hard costs, soft costs. What do you see as that?
The toughest one, it takes a lot of time and effort and money to develop a client and develop a client base, and a simple thing like um, not following through on your commitments, even when you think you're right, or and the client's wrong, you can lose that client in a heartbeat. And again, that word gets around because while Indianapolis is a big city, it's still it's still pretty tight knit community in terms of business. So there are situations like that the if you go that route, you're going to begin to lose clients, not just the client that you might have not agreed with, but your words, that reputation is going to get around, no doubt about it.
So Phil, I think that that particular uh, vendor, who we won't name, obviously, probably thought we were never going to contract with them again. Perhaps we didn't. They thought we never would need their services again, and they concluded that it wasn't going to be worth their while to uphold the spirit of our agreement. Do, do you does that calculus ever come into play? Do you ever weigh, this is a one-time job, and does that change your calculus at all?
No, because you can't pick and choose in those instances. You have to be consistent for your employees because again, as you're educating young employees or any of the employees here about this is the way we do business, and then they see an example where you're not following that lead, that just defeats the purpose of all the education you've been giving them. So you just really can't do that. You need to use it as a teaching minute and move on from it. And again, it happens periodically, but it does happen, and you just have to be consistent in how you manage through those instances.
So I think there's a softer return. Don't you feel good doing the right thing? I feel good doing the right thing, and I know that it might sting in the short term, and it's great that there's a solid chance of a long-term return in the form of reputation and customer retention. But in the short term, that hard cost is offset by that soft return of just feeling very, very good about doing the right thing.
No doubt. And I preach that all the time. You need to be able to sleep at night with the way you transact business. And when you're trying to screw over different clients or something like that, you just can't sleep well. So that's what I preach to our employees all the time. So I 100% agree with you.
Yeah, that other unnamed vendor, before they understood the cost of the solution, they said all the right things, and when the cost came in, they stopped returning our phone calls. And so hopefully they have some restless nights.
Yes, I agree.
Well, Phil, it has been wonderful having you on. I was not a party to this story, so it's fun just hearing about it because it was a new story for me. And it sounds like you have a really great culture that you've been building over the years, and you're just someone who does business the right way, which I always love seeing and hearing about. Is there anything else you would like our listeners to know about, or if you want to talk about Wilhelm at all, and just give them a little more background on that?
No, that's our company, and again, we're approaching our 100th year in business here, which is pretty cool. And we love Indianapolis and throughout the area here, and we travel around Indiana, Kentucky, and Ohio. We have about 2,500 employees throughout that work area in a variety of different businesses in general, mechanical, electrical, and fire protection, construction areas. We do all types of construction, pretty much everything but residential and single family houses and those things. So it's something, as I say, it's Indianapolis and this part of the Midwest has been great to us. And as it's grown, our company's grown. And Greg and I were talking earlier how the market around here is really solid. And I look for several more years of great construction and a great economy around here. So no, thank you for having me on today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Phil. And for their listeners, an unqualified recommendation to work with Phil and his team at Wilhelm. Arcamed had a great experience, and I know that every client that works with Wilhelm also has that similar great experience. So thanks, Phil, for the ethical and the courage to do the right thing, the ethical approach to business. It means a lot to us. And thanks for being on the show. Man, Phil's such a great guy. It was just a pleasure to have him on, and it was a pleasure when we were able to work with his company as well.
Yeah, I agree. I really enjoyed hearing his take and getting his side of the story too. Let's get an academic view now from Professor Joanne Gavin.
Well, we're here today with Professor Joanne Gavin. Professor Joanne Gavin is the Associate Dean for Undergraduate Programs and a Professor of Management at Marist University, and also the co-author of a paper entitled Assessing the Costs and Benefits of Ethics, Exploring a Framework. So we're excited to explore the costs and benefits of ethics. Thanks for joining us today.
You're very welcome. I'm happy to be here.
So maybe we can start by getting some insight into your background. How did you get into ethical business practices as a academic concentration and really passion?
Well, it actually started when I was in industry. This is second career for me. And I worked in healthcare, which is an industry, in my opinion, that ethics is critical in, but I saw many what I perceived to be unethical practices and very poor management practices. And the two led me to decide that going back to school, getting my doctorate, and teaching the things that I was passionate about being effective in the workplace was what I wanted to do with my life.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up, why how you got into teaching. One thing that we're really curious about is we've been kind of exploring ethics from, a business perspective, but you're one of the people teaching current business students about ethical business practices. Why is that important?
I think it's important because these are the people who will be making the major decisions that will affect industries, all business practices as we move forward. And I think one of the things that's really important is that, in my opinion, historically, business schools failed in terms of ethics. We taught students how to get to a good bottom line. We taught them how important it was to be at a good, healthy bottom line. But we failed historically to teach them that there's a right and wrong way to get to that bottom line, and that you can get to that bottom line successfully and run great ethical companies at the same time.
Yeah, and so one thing I kind of wonder about is, I went through a business ethics class, and I felt there was a bit of a gap between, like the philosophical ethics and actual like ethical business practices. Do you see that gap, or do you think there's a need to teach that higher level concept of ethics first, or how do you blend these two ideas, or are they the same idea?
I don't think they're the same at all. Historically, what you get in philosophy course is the theory of ethics, but business ethics is very applied and practical. It's how do you take those lofty thoughts and ideas and put them into practice? The way I approach that is I teach my students decision making. And what I tell them is that I believe fundamentally that most people would make the right decision if they knew what the right decision was. I think most, not all, but most unethical practices are because people don't recognize that what they're doing may be wrong. And at the core of that, from everything I've read, seen, and studied, is that we fail to recognize all stakeholders. And so, what I really work hard with my students on is recognizing who is going to be impacted by the decisions you make, and to take all of those stakeholders into consideration when making decisions. And it's a learned habit. We start talking about little small things, but if you start um, implementing into your everyday decision making the how that outcome of that decision is going to impact everyone involved, and not even just within the organization, but the community and society as well. It's that big picture concept when making decisions that are going to affect the lives of many people.
Well, I would love to explore this a little bit more. The outcome of a decision and how it impacts everyone involved, all the stakeholders. And one of those impacts is the cost to the business, or that's often a factor. And do you see, or do you think? I guess maybe I'm a bit more cynical than you are, and I see the application of good ethics uh, almost universal when the cost is low, and so that goes to your point where most people will do the right thing if they know what the right thing is. But as the cost of that good ethical decision increases, do you think that then and that's really where the rubber meets the road, right?
Sure, sure. Well, yes, I think the short answer to your question is yes. Many people back off once they start seeing the financial impact of doing good and doing right. But there's a lot of research out there that shows that there is a payoff. The cost benefit is in many cases, I can't say all, but then again, even in the ones where it wasn't, have we really evaluated everything the way it should have been evaluated to understand what the cost to the bottom line was? But a lot of research is showing that there is a payoff, a true payoff to the firm to do the right thing, especially as we're getting more and more educated consumers. There are investment funds out there that only invest in ethical companies. There are literally databases that help you look at organizations that, and they rate them on their ethical practices. So as you get consumers who are becoming more in tuned to putting their dollars into firms that do the right thing, the more the payoff for doing the right thing is going to be a viable business solution.
So one more follow-up question on that topic. Do you think when you can get away with it, so to speak, when there is no reputational consequence, is there still a long-term payoff that would show up in the research, even in cases of short-term expense with no reputational consequence?
I'm not sure our research tools have become sophisticated enough to get at those kind of small nuances. To be perfectly honest, a research stream into ethical practices of organizations is relatively new. First time I read, and it was one of my favorite books, a gentleman by the name of Robert Solomon wrote a book called A Better Way to Think About Business. And it was talking about business as part of society and part of community. It was the first time I was exposed to this concept of we have to stop thinking of businesses in this silo effect and the generation of profit, but that they are functional entities that live within communities and should be part of those communities. And I think it's in changing mindset to that and learning more about how to make those smaller nuanced measurements about the payoff of doing the right thing, that we're getting there, but we're not there yet.
So we've been talking a lot about costs and the cost of ethics. And I think we can all agree that there is a cost, whether it's high or low. I'm sure it's situational. But how do you make the cost worth it to the people actually making these decisions? I feel like there's, a wide range of ethical beliefs within a company. So as leaders, how can we really impact people to not only feel empowered, but make it worth it to them to be making the right decision?
Well, I think the biggest thing that has to happen, and I've seen this in organizations, they people in your organization, you talk when we first spoke, we talked a lot about your concern with a good culture. And I think ethics is at the core of culture, or culture is at the core of ethics, depending upon how you want to look at it. But I think people have to believe that they're going to be rewarded for doing the right thing. They have to believe that there's not going to be ramifications if doing the right thing might cost a little bit of money. They have to see those behaviors um, displayed at the very top. And I think if you can instill that into your culture, there's a gentleman by the name of Edgar Schein who studies culture. And he talks about all these things that you look for to look for a good, healthy, strong culture. But underlying all of those visible things of culture, he says people have to walk the walk and not just talk the talk. There has to be, he calls them espoused and enacted values. People have to live those values. And if you can create the culture and it is supported from the very top that says, no, this is who we are and we believe in doing the right thing, and no one is going to be criticized or reprimanded for doing the right thing, even if there is a cost to this, then people start buying in at a different level. Now, are there limitations, and should, parameters be set up of, when is it at your discretion and when do you need to talk to someone? Of course there should. All of this has to be taken realistically. But I think it is setting up an environment where people feel that doing the right thing is not only accepted but expected, that people really buy in, that it might be worth that extra effort, that extra cost to do the right thing for everyone.
I wanted to go back to this idea about the sort of the philosophical piece of it, and I agree with you that a lot of that is theory. Um, Aristotle, I think, was one of those philosophers who said that virtue of ethics is practical, and it's not merely to know, but to become good. I'm paraphrasing, obviously, and also that the right course of action depends on the details of a particular situation. So it's situational rather than just a general application of law. So how do we look at it when we look at, say, Harvard's ethics department, and all the case studies, and say, okay, well, this is the application of that standard, but my facts and circumstances are a little bit different. So it's really left up to us uneducated to the extent that we're not experts on ethics to figure out the right answer in a particular situation.
To a large degree, it is, especially when you speak of Aristotle, because Aristotle is really about personal character. And he's the only one, as you say, that looks at situational, and it's what do I do to be the best person I can be in this situation? And there is no basic blueprint to that. But Aristotle's feeling is that by engaging in behaviors that make you a better person, you habituate those into not only self, but organizations as well, as we all try to be the best person we can be and develop our personal character. And I think often that we fail in those attempts, that it's kind of trial and error to find out what is going to make me the best person. When you first start doing stuff like this and saying, well, I'm going to do what makes me a good person, I don't think we always know what that answer is. And so I think it is a little more difficult than the case studies that are set up purposefully to help academics teach a concept. When you start applying it to real life, it's not, well, ethics is almost, in my opinion, almost never black and white. But there's so many shades of gray when you're actually trying to live the concepts. And, I spoke before about when you're making decisions, it's about all stakeholders. But from all perspectives, but especially from Aristotle's perspective, doing what is right to make you the best person you can be, is at the core of everything we should be doing. And that's difficult, because there is no simple answer to it. And there's not even, in my opinion, a good blueprint. If we deal with some of the other ethical frameworks, it's like, well, make a decision that everyone would be happy if we all made in that decision. And it's kind of a rule that, at least gives you guidelines to follow. From a character perspective and Aristotelian perspective, um, doing what makes you the best person, I believe, is much more difficult. But in the long run, I think it is a much stronger perspective, to build the foundation. Um, and organizations are nothing more than a compilation of the people who make it up. So if we're going to work as best we can to make each person the best they can in each situation, by default, you're going to create that ethical organization.
Yeah, so with that in mind, I know we touched earlier on implications of businesses, but I want to dig into that a little bit more. What are the short term and long term implications for a business that isn't concerned with ethical behavior, whether it's from the top, whether it's people working day to day there, or all throughout? What does this really do to a company? What are the costs of bad ethical practices?
I wish I could say I thought, all unethical companies felt the ramification of it immediately. That's simply not true. I do believe eventually, bad ethical practices will catch up with all businesses. In some cases, it catches up very quickly, in others, it doesn't. But I think what it does do from the beginning is it impacts the commitment, the loyalty, the the engagement of the members of the community. I've worked for companies that I was embarrassed to work for. Might be why I did what I do as well. That company was a periphery in healthcare, but it was like, how can you have people's lives in your hands and you're not doing the right thing for them? And eventually it did catch up with them. It took much longer than I would have hoped. But I believe unethical companies will eventually reap the negative benefits because people working for the organization are going to recognize what's going on. Now, will you have, again, this is the real world. Will you have a handful of people who could care less about doing the right thing and all the, yes, you will. But most organizations, most people want to feel good about what they do all day. Most people spend more time working with their people at work than they do with their families. And so we want to go home at night feeling good about what we've done. We want to feel like we have made a contribution and we've done the right thing. And people recognize when that's not happening and they'll jump ship as soon as they can. And so, in order to have a consistent workforce, a loyal workforce, people who are committed to the mission of the organization, I think it has to be set upon good values.
Yeah, I think you're right, or I surely hope you're right. And we can see some long-term implications of bad ethical decisions. You mentioned Enron. Obviously, that did not end well for that company and those involved. And there are some studies about the wisdom of doing a recall in the near term as being less expensive overall than delaying the recall and suffering the ramifications of that delay. And so I believe that makes sense. That there is some aspect of faith that good ethical decisions will pay off in the long run, whether that's retention or other things. Have you ever seen a scenario where the cost of the ethical behavior was so high as to imperil the company, maybe from even continuing on as a going concern?
The biggest example I can think of in those terms is, and I was not in higher ed at the time, but there are a lot of studies about it. Is when J&J pulled Tylenol off the shelves after the Tylenol scare. Their stock price dropped like crazy, and people thought they were definitely making the wrong decision. But they talked about their credo and how their credo gave them no choice but to do it because they were clear that patients' lives had to come first. And there was a lot of financial and discussions about how they were never going to rebound. Within 6 months, their stock price was back up higher than it had been before they pulled Tylenol off the shelves. And a lot of people use that as an example of, even when the financial pundits are saying this was a mistake, you will never recover, um, doing the right thing, especially in a healthcare type Johnson and Johnson product environment. People decided, wait, I'm going to put my money in a company that's going to care about my life over profits, and and it paid off for them. So um, I don't know of an example where the decision was fatal and the company did not recover. Um, the biggest example I know of is when they thought it wouldn't, but it did. Um, and that is encouraging. Now, is there a company that did the right thing and it cost them? I'm sure there is. I just don't know of one.
I think you just came up with a wonderful stock picking concept of buying the shares of companies that take a beating for short-term ethical ethical decisions and then write them up. I like that.
I think we have the opposite examples as well of when companies do the wrong thing. Ford, when they chose, to hide the Pinto crashes or the rollovers, or unfortunately, we have several examples. Um, People made the same decision with their discretionary dollars. I'll put my dollars in a company that cares if I live or not. And that's when I was speaking earlier before about these new trends of investing in ethical companies. This is becoming more and more important to people. And the more we speak with our investment dollars and our discretionary dollars, the more companies are going to take notice that doing the right thing is not just good for them, but it's also financially good.
Well, thank you, Joanne. I always love to have an academic perspective on here. I think it gives us, a fuller picture of the topic that we're discussing. We'll be sure to link to A Better Way to Think About Business in the bio so that our listeners can check that out. Is there anything else that you want to plug, or any other resources you think would be beneficial to the listeners?
I think there are some, I would say the name, Better Way to Think About Business is Robert Solomon. He is no longer, he is deceased now. He's no longer with us, but his writings, he was a philosopher by training, but he did a lot of application of his philosophy to business. And I think he is one of the better people to read. He's got some very interesting work out there. And I think looking up his research might be beneficial to your listeners.
Good. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I definitely appreciated having you on. Yeah. So I hope we can chat again soon, and I look forward to keeping in touch.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure. I enjoyed the discussion. I really get to have discussions like these, so I enjoyed it myself.
It was fun. Thanks so much, Professor.
You're very welcome. Have a wonderful day.
Joanne was a lot of fun to talk to. I wish I had her when I was in school. She was great. So, Caroline, what did we learn today?
Well, from Joanne, we learned, I think, that we have failed historically to teach business ethics well. We have done a great job of teaching folks to achieve the bottom line, but not as much how to get there ethically, and just how to do things the right way.
Yeah. I really liked how Joanne phrased it. It's not a matter of teaching people how to be good people. In her estimation, most people would make the right decision if they just knew what it was. And in most cases, the cost-benefit weighs in favor of the ethical choice. Not always, but in most cases. So her point is that people are unaware of the unethical impact their decision might have on various stakeholders, and they just need to be made aware. I hope she's right.
Yeah, I mean, she really emphasized that she sees companies as members of the community. And although she didn't say this explicitly, it seems she is in favor of stakeholder capitalism, which is still very much a vigorous debate. Perhaps business ethics shows up in stakeholder versus shareholder capitalism. Maybe we need to do a future episode on that, because something we need to dive into a bit further, I think.
Yeah, I agree with that. That would be fun to talk about. And the gray area, that's really what she was trying to stress, is ethics is rarely black and white. And there's so much gray area, which is why it can be difficult to figure out, what is the right decision.
Yeah, and she mentioned Edgar Schein's model of culture. We'll make sure to put a link to that article in our bio so that you can check it out for yourself. But essentially, it's a helpful construct in determining where to focus. In short form, your culture is made up of various components. You have the ping pong table, you have the values, norms, the walk versus the talk. And, it's really the walk, which Schein calls basic assumptions, that is the foundational bedrock of culture.
Yeah, I think her example is a great one. Enron, which maybe you're too young to remember that story, but I remember it clearly.
I saw a documentary on it, Greg, I think I'm...
Enron had the ping pong table component, and they had the values, norms, language component in spades. So they said all the right things, but they didn't really walk the walk at all.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm really looking forward to reading the book that she recommended, A Better Way to Think About Business. I think that'll expand even further on some of the topics that she discussed. But we also learned a lot from Phil. Greg, what do you think the big takeaways were from Phil?
Well, Phil's a super great guy, and I can tell you that working with him versus working with some other vendors, it's obvious how he feels about business ethics. And what struck me was that he always conducts business relationally, not transactionally. And even he doesn't approach it on a customer by customer basis. Will I have an opportunity to work with this person again? He approaches it all as relationships and not as transactions. And I think if you are in a relationship with a business rather than in a transaction, the ethical behavior becomes good business.
Yeah, I felt like as we were talking to him, it was almost so ingrained in him, the way that that behavior and the relationship versus transactional. It was almost like he struggled to answer it because it was so obvious to him, which I love. It was like, well, this is just what we do, and I think that is a reflection of his grandfather and his uncle and the honor that they kind of instilled in the company early on, and he's continued that tradition. And it's interesting to hear kind of how it's adapted too, just over the years as the company continues to do business.
Yeah, the way he does business is evidenced by Kevin's contrary story at the beginning of this episode. It's more rare than it should be, and he takes the long view, which I guess being a third generation family business owner, it probably is not that hard to do. Take the long view, but he has full faith that the short term hit he takes by doing something that's ethical and that's right, which he did for us, that short term hit pays off in the long term in terms of the company's reputation and the sustained, long-standing customer relationships. And so that faith, and again, we also heard from on the academic side that the cost-benefit analysis often sides with the ethical choice, but that faith allows him to pursue business ethics with no regrets.
Well, and I think, both short-term and long-term, you just feel good about yourself. You feel good about how you've conducted yourself. You feel good about your company. And Phil talked about that when you act the right way. One of the biggest short-term and long-term benefits is just that feeling. And I mean, how can you really put a value on that?
Yeah, I think it was Mark Howell a few episodes back that said that people want to be proud of the company and they want to be proud of where they work. And that we thought about, well, that's really a great measure of cultural success. Are people proud to work for you? And I can tell you this, life as a business owner, life would be so much more pleasant if everyone in my business life conducted business the way Phil Kenney does.
Yeah, we'll be sure to link to their business page so everyone has the opportunity to interact with them for themselves, because I agree, Greg. I think they make our lives a lot easier, and we certainly appreciated that.
Yeah, absolutely.